May 1945. The world breathed a sigh of relief. The Third Reich, that sinister empire of evil that lasted only 12 years, lay in ruins. Adolf Hitler was dead, his bunker a mass grave of ambitions. The Gestapo was crushed, and the main ideologues and perpetrators of horrifying crimes against humanity, such as Hermann Göring and Rudolf Hess, were caught and brought to justice at Nuremberg. It seemed the era of impunity was over, and justice, however brutal, had prevailed. Humanity yearned to believe that every guilty hand would be punished, and every name, stained with the blood of millions of innocent victims, would be called and condemned. But this was merely an illusion, a deceptive calm after the storm. In the shadow of post-war chaos, amidst the rubble of bombed-out cities and millions of displaced persons, another, no less shocking story unfolded. The story of thousands of Nazi criminals, including high-ranking SS officers, architects of the Holocaust, and clandestine financiers, who managed to evade justice, disappearing without a trace. Where did they go? And who, or what, helped them hide from reckoning, holding their breath for decades, or even forever? This mystery, full of intrigue, controversial facts, and shocking revelations, still troubles historians and researchers, uncovering the dark sides of human nature and geopolitical games. This escape was not accidental or chaotic. It was meticulously organized through complex hidden networks known as ratlines. Among the most infamous secret escape routes were the so-called ratlines. This term, sinister-sounding and still evoking shivers, describes the complex, well-organized networks created in post-war Europe to help former Nazis, SS members, and collaborators evade capture. These paths stretched from Germany and Austria through Italy and Spain, and further to South America or the Middle East. These weren't merely chaotic escapes of individuals driven by panic. They were meticulously planned and established systems that required coordination, significant financial resources, and the patronage of influential figures. And surprisingly, certain circles within the Catholic Church played a central role in this. It's important to emphasize, not the entire Church as an institution, which undoubtedly also suffered under Nazism, but specific representatives, driven by various, often contradictory motives, actively facilitated this process. Why would spiritual figures help war criminals whose hands were stained with the blood of millions? The primary driving force behind these actions was deep-seated anti-communism. Many church representatives, especially after the brutal persecution of Christians in the Soviet Union and the spread of communist ideology in Eastern Europe, genuinely considered Bolshevism a greater evil than Nazism. They saw in former Nazis, or at least some of them, especially those not directly involved in atrocities or whom they considered victims of the regime, potential allies in a future struggle against the USSR, which seemed like a new, no less totalitarian threat to Europe. Some priests, such as the Austrian Bishop Alois Hudal, who worked at the Vatican and was rector of the Pontifical German College of Santa Maria dell'Anima in Rome, openly aided SS members and other fugitives, justifying it with Christian charity or by claiming they were persecuted and political prisoners despite their horrific crimes, which were already known to the world. The ratlines mechanism was well established and operated like clockwork. Nazis found refuge in monasteries, church shelters, and private homes, which served as transit points on the path to a new life. Here they could wait, receive food, new clothes, and most importantly, forged documents. They were often issued fake Red Cross passports, allowing them to travel across borders, or personal documents with fabricated names, produced with the assistance of certain church officials who had access to the necessary resources and connections. Simultaneously, in these same places or through connected networks, funds for the escape were often raised. This money came from secret Nazi funds that had been transferred before or during the war's final stages, hidden in neutral banks, or through donations from sympathizers and former supporters of the Nazi regime. Thus, criminals received not only clean documents that allowed them to disappear from radar, but also significant financial support for a new life in exile, far from justice. Some of them stayed in monasteries for quite a long time, sometimes years, waiting for interest in their person to subside and accumulating enough funds for further travel and settling in a new place. These routes often led to South America, where one country in particular stood out for its willingness to welcome fugitives. One of the main destinations for these ratlines, stretching across the ocean, was Argentina. This distant South American country did not accidentally become a refuge for thousands of Nazi criminals, including some of the most odious figures of the Third Reich. And a key role in this was played by the policy of Juan Perón, who came to power in 1946. Juan Perón was a charismatic and ambitious military officer who, after the 1943 coup, quickly gained popularity among the working class and was elected president of Argentina in 1946. His ideology, known as Peronism, contained elements of populism, nationalism, and outright sympathy for European fascism, especially Benito Mussolini's Italian regime. Perón genuinely believed in building a powerful, independent Argentina that should not submit to the dictates of the victors of World War II. He viewed Allied pressure regarding the extradition of criminals as interference in his state's internal affairs and an infringement on its sovereignty. This stance was not just a political game, but a deep conviction of Perón's about the need to protect national interests. It was this unwavering position that allowed thousands of Nazis to settle freely in Argentina without fear of extradition, receiving protection from the government. In addition to ideological and political motives, there were also significant economic ones. Argentina was extremely interested in German specialists, scientists, engineers, military personnel, and intelligence officers. Their experience and knowledge were invaluable for the development of its own industry, military technologies, and infrastructure, which Perón sought to transform into a regional superpower. This was a purely pragmatic calculation, to acquire valuable personnel and technologies at any cost, and Perón was willing to turn a blind eye to the past crimes of these individuals for the sake of his country's future. Legends of gold boats, meaning submarines filled with looted wealth, allegedly heading to Argentina to deliver these treasures and secure a new life for the fugitives, are widespread, but lack direct, conclusive evidence of regular convoys of gold-laden submarines crossing the Atlantic. However, the fact that significant Nazi financial assets were moved and used to fund escape networks and lives in exile, including in Argentina, has been confirmed by numerous studies and declassified documents. This gold and other valuables were used to bribe officials, pay for forged documents, purchase real estate, and ensure a comfortable life for the fugitives, allowing them to integrate into Argentine society, often forming prosperous German communities. But Argentina was not the only country providing refuge. Paradoxically, even former enemies of Nazism were involved in this. And here we encounter one of history's most shocking paradoxes, which still causes deep outrage and debate. In the escape of Nazi criminals, not only their ideological sympathizers and brothers in arms might have been interested, but also former enemies, Americans, British, and other Western states. How is it possible that countries which shed blood fighting Nazism could consciously or unconsciously help its perpetrators evade justice? The key factor explaining this chilling alliance was the Cold War. After the final victory over Hitler, the Soviet Union, which suffered the greatest casualties in the war and expanded its influence into Eastern Europe, suddenly became the main threat to the West. An era of ideological confrontation, an arms race, and total intelligence warfare began, where every resource that could give an advantage over the communist bloc was invaluable. In this new bipolar reality, the experience and knowledge of former Nazis, especially in the fields of intelligence, science, and military technology, suddenly became extremely valuable assets. For example, the United States actively implemented Operation Paperclip. This was a secret government program under which American intelligence agencies recruited leading German scientists and engineers, even those with direct ties to the Nazi regime, including membership in the NSDAP or SS, to utilize their expertise in rocket programs, aviation, nuclear physics, and other strategically important fields. The most famous example is Wernher von Braun, the creator of the deadly V-2 rockets that bombed London. He was a member of the Nazi Party and an SS officer, but his knowledge was deemed more valuable than his past. Von Braun became one of the fathers of the American space program, notably playing a key role in the creation of the Saturn V rocket that took humans to the moon. Similar programs, though smaller in scale, also existed in Great Britain, where intelligence services also used former Nazi intelligence officers and anti-communists to gather information and conduct operations against the USSR, as well as to identify potential Soviet agents. This allowed them to gain valuable intelligence on Soviet plans and infiltrate communist networks. So who were these culprits who successfully disappeared from the sight of justice? And how did they live, hiding, leading seemingly ordinary lives in Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, or even in Europe? Some of them, before their escape, had long hidden in the aforementioned monasteries, which provided them refuge and anonymity, waiting for the opportune moment or raising funds for their further journey. These were years of uncertainty, filled with the fear of exposure, but also hope for complete disappearance from the radar of justice. They lived under assumed names, with forged documents, constantly looking over their shoulder, knowing that they might be hunted. Among those who definitely hid and were later discovered or caught, the most famous are Adolf Eichmann. This architect of the final solution, responsible for the logistics of the Holocaust and the mass extermination of the Jews, managed to escape to Argentina after the war. He lived there under the assumed name Ricardo Clement, working as a manager at a Mercedes-Benz factory. However, his new life ended in 1960, largely due to the imprudence of his own son, who, flaunting the girls, talked too much about his father's true identity and his activities during World War II. This information eventually reached Israeli intelligence agents Mossad, who tracked him down, kidnapped him from Argentina, took him to Israel, where he stood trial, was convicted of crimes against humanity, and hanged. It was a triumph of justice, which showed that even after a decade, crime has no statute of limitations, and sometimes the simplest mistakes can lead to retribution. Josef Mengele, the angel of death from Auschwitz, whose terrible medical experiments on prisoners are still a symbol of Nazi atrocities, also fled to South America. He went into hiding in Argentina, then Paraguay, and eventually settled in Brazil, living under different names. At the beginning, he did not have much money and worked at various part-time jobs, but later, using his medical skills, he began to practice medicine illegally, in particular, to perform illegal abortions for money. He maintained ties with former Nazis who helped him financially and provided information. Mengele was never caught. He died of a stroke while swimming in the ocean in 1979. His remains were found and identified only later, which confirmed his death. Klaus Barbie, known as the Butcher of Lyon for his brutal crimes in France, including torture and murder of resistance members. After the war, he fled to Bolivia, where he became an advisor to local special services, teaching them methods of torture and suppressing opposition. He was hidden for decades, partly due to his value to Western intelligence agencies as an anti-communist. However, thanks to the tireless work of Nazi hunters, Barbie was extradited to France in 1983, tried and convicted of crimes against humanity. But there were also those whose fate remained uncertain or shrouded in speculation, giving rise to numerous myths and conspiracy theories. Heinrich Müller, the head of the Gestapo, his fate remains one of the greatest mysteries of World War II. He was last seen in Hitler's bunker in the final days of the war. There were numerous theories that he escaped to Argentina, the United States, as a double agent for the CIA, exchanging information for freedom, or even the USSR, where he might have worked for Soviet intelligence. There is no conclusive evidence of his death or escape. This mystery underscores the difficulty of the search and how effectively some criminals manage to erase their tracks and disappear without a trace. Martin Bormann, Hitler's private secretary, considered one of the most powerful men in the Third Reich. For decades, there were legends of his escape to South America, with books and even films made on the subject, fueling the myth of a Nazi underground. Only in 1972, during construction work in Berlin, were his remains found, and DNA testing conducted in 1998 definitively confirmed that he died trying to escape from Hitler's bunker in 1945. This case vividly demonstrates how escape myths could live longer than the person themselves, feeding the idea of a hidden Nazi network. As for how they earned a living, the spectrum was wide. From using hidden capital and assistance from extensive support networks to performing manual labor in factories, farms, or even opening small businesses under new names. Some, like Barbie, even found work in the intelligence services of their host countries, trading their expertise for protection. But against these shadows of the past, there were always those who believed in the unyielding power of justice. For decades, thousands of people, known as Nazi hunters, dedicated their lives to tracking down and bringing to justice those who had evaded punishment. It was a desperate struggle for justice, often waged amidst indifference or even outright opposition from some governments that had their own reasons for concealing the past. The most famous figure among them was Simon Wiesenthal, a Jew who survived the Holocaust and lost almost his entire family. After being liberated from a concentration camp, he dedicated his life to searching for Nazi criminals. His center in Vienna did immense work in tracking, gathering evidence, and providing information for prosecutions worldwide. He was a symbol of an unbreakable will for justice, constantly reminding the world that justice has no statute of limitations. A key role in this struggle was also played by Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency. The operation to capture Adolf Eichmann in Argentina is a vivid example of their determination and professionalism. Mossad agents acted secretly, overcoming vast distances and risking their own lives to abduct the criminal and bring him to justice, where he could answer for his actions. This was not just revenge, but the restoration of justice for millions of victims. The work of Nazi hunters was extremely difficult and dangerous. They faced challenges such as lack of documents. Much evidence had been destroyed or removed, complicating identification. Changes of names and hidden identities. Criminals lived under new names with new appearances, often changing their place of residence to avoid detection. Protection from some states. Some countries, as we mentioned, deliberately harbored Nazis, making them untouchable by justice or were unwilling to cooperate with international bodies, citing internal laws. Age of criminals. Over the years, they grew older, which complicated identification and capture, and also sparked debates about the appropriateness of their prosecution, especially when it came to their advanced age and health. However, these people believed that crimes against humanity have no statute of limitations. They fought not only for revenge, but also to ensure that the world remembered the horrors of Nazism and that every crime was named and condemned. Their tireless work led to the prosecution of hundreds of criminals, although thousands remained undiscovered and their names were never revealed. The stories of these escapes and pursuits carry deep lessons for the present and future. The stories of Nazi leaders' escape and their evasion of justice represent one of the darkest, most complex, and controversial chapters in the history of World War II and the post-war period. It demonstrates how complex geopolitical interests, ideological prejudices, and the pragmatism of certain states allowed many criminals to evade deserved punishment, change their lives, and even prosper. This wasn't merely a coincidence, but the result of deliberate actions by various actors who, for their own motives, consciously or unconsciously contributed to impunity, creating a shadow empire in exile.